This is the story of India's worst runway-related accident.
That is the wreckage of the Air India flight.
Families of the victims mourn the death of their loved ones.
It was the breaking up of the plane as it overshot the runway at Mangalore Airport.
On May 22, 2010, Air India Express Flight 812 was approaching the Mangalore airport. Everything was normal. The captain has done this route 19 times before, but today, he is sleeping in the cockpit. The first officer is flying the aircraft, essentially doing the job of two people. The flight is descending at 4,000 feet per minute, more than 3 times the normal rate of descent. Warnings are ignored
Pull up.
one after another. The flight finally touches down. The crew applies reverse thrust, but it overshoots the runway and bursts into flames. So how did this happen? May 19, 2010, Captain Zlatko Glusica lands in Mangalore, India. The 55-year-old Serbian pilot has just returned from a 2-week vacation in his home country. His body clock is still adjusting. Serbia is 3.5 hours behind India. He's an experienced commander with over 10,000 flight hours, including 2,844 on the Boeing 737-800. The next day, Air India Express calls. They need him to take a flight, a last-minute replacement for another pilot.
Okay, I will do it.
He agrees. This is how scheduling used to be at Air India Express in 2010. Unlike major carriers that use sophisticated computer systems, Air India Express relies on manual scheduling, literally pencil, paper, and eraser. The flight is what's known as a quick turnaround or QTA, a routine overnight journey from Mangalore to Dubai and back. It's scheduled to depart Mangalore at 9:35 p.m. on May 21st, land in Dubai at 1:14 a.m. Indian time, take off again at 2:45 a.m. and return to Mangalore by 6:30 a.m. Joining Captain Glusica in the cockpit will be the first officer Ahluwalia, a 40-year-old pilot from Mumbai. Unlike many first officers, Ahluwalia is highly experienced with over 3,600 flight hours. He is known among colleagues as meticulous, a stickler for procedures. The aircraft itself is practically new, a Boeing 737-800 delivered to Air India Express in January 2008, just over 2 years earlier. It's equipped with the short field performance package, making it suitable for operations at airports with shorter runways like Mangalore. But there is one critical gap in the pre-flight procedures. Air India Express has no medical officer on staff at Mangalore Airport. While Indian aviation regulations mandate pre-flight medical checks, the airline simply has pilots self-certify their fitness to fly. No actual medical tests are performed. At 9:35 p.m. on May 21, 2010, Flight 811 takes off from Mangalore, bound for Dubai. The first leg of the journey is uneventful. The Boeing 737 touches down in Dubai at 1:14 a.m. Indian time. During the 80-minute turnaround, ground staff who interact with the pilots report nothing unusual in their behavior. At 2:36 a.m. Indian time, Flight 812 takes off from Dubai with 160 passengers, including 4 infants and 6 crew members. The return journey to Mangalore has begun, but a substantial portion of this flight will occur during what sleep scientists call the window of circadian low. This is a critical period in human physiology. Between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. lies the lowest point in our natural body rhythms. When alertness plummets, reaction time slow, judgment suffers, and the urge to sleep becomes nearly irresistible. Pilots flying during this period are physiologically at their most vulnerable. Just 1 hour into the 3-hour flight, something concerning happens. Captain Glusica falls asleep in his seat. This isn't a controlled rest, a carefully managed nap sometimes permitted on long flights with specific protocols. This is deep, unplanned sleep. The cockpit voice recorder later revealed he remained asleep for approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes. His microphone picked up the unmistakable sounds of heavy breathing, mild snoring, and light rhythmic breathing, clear indicators of deep sleep. First Officer Ahluwalia, now effectively alone in the cockpit, handles all radio communications with air traffic control. He doesn't attempt to wake the captain. As the plane crosses into Indian airspace, vital pre-descent briefings and checklists go uncompleted. According to Air India Express procedures, descent preparation should begin approximately 150 nautical miles from the destination. This preparation includes weather reviews, approach briefings, and defining the roles of both pilots. None of this happens on Flight 812. At 5:33 am, the first officer makes contact with Mangalore Area Control. The plane is approaching the reporting point Igama at 37,000 feet. It's here that a critical piece of information emerges.
Radar not available, sir.
The controller informs them the Mangalore Area Control radar has been unserviceable since May 20th, 2 days earlier. This means the air traffic controllers must rely on procedural control, mentally tracking aircraft positions rather than seeing them on radar screens. As a safety precaution, they keep aircraft further apart and delay descent clearances. First Officer Ahluwalia requests information about type of approach to expect.
It will be an ILS DM-EARC approach.
Replies the controller. This isn't a standard straight-in approach. Due to the Kudremukh Hills east of Mangalore Airport, aircraft approaching runway 24 need to follow a curved path around the airport before lining up with the runway. It's a more complex approach requiring careful planning and precise execution. At about 130 miles from Mangalore, Ahluwalia requests descent clearance, but it's denied by air traffic control. Without radar, controllers need to maintain larger separation between aircraft. Finally, at 77 miles from the airport, much closer than normal, they're cleared to descend to 7,000 feet. It's around this time, about 21 minutes before the crash, the captain Glusica finally wakes up. First Officer Ahluwalia briefs him on the weather conditions and expected approach, but the captain responds minimally. The approach briefing is incomplete and doesn't follow Air India Express's standard operating procedures. Waking from deep sleep doesn't mean instant alertness. Sleep scientists call it sleep inertia, a period of impaired cognition and decision making that can last up to 30 minutes after waking. Your body is awake, but your brain isn't fully online. Think about the worst decision you have ever made immediately after waking up. Now imagine making that decision while piloting a 70-ton aircraft approaching one of India's most challenging airports. By now, they're descending too late and from a closer distance than ideal. This creates a steep descent profile that will haunt them for the remainder of the flight. Mangalore Airport isn't your typical landing strip built on a plateau 101 meters above sea level. It features what's known as tabletop runway, a runway surrounded by steep drops on all sides. Runway 24 measures 2,450 meters, approximately 8,000 feet in length, and beyond its end lies a 90-meter safety area followed by a steep cliff descending into a gorge. The risks are so significant that Air India Express has classified Mangalore as a critical airfield requiring special qualification. Only captains are permitted to perform takeoffs and landings there. As the aircraft descends toward Mangalore, the situation deteriorates further. Without a proper approach briefing and starting descent late, they find themselves significantly higher than the ideal approach path. Captain Glusica, possibly still suffering from sleep inertia, deploys the speed brakes in an attempt to increase their rate of descent. At 25 nautical miles from the airport, they're cleared to descend to 2,900 feet, The first officer requests permission to proceed directly to the 338 radial to join the 10 DME arc approach. The controller approves, but this decision would prove problematic. They're already too high, and shortening the approach gives them less distance to lose altitude. When they reach the 10 DME arc, they report established to tower control, but they remain well above the proper approach profile. At this point, they should have been at 2,900 feet. Instead, they're at 10,500 feet, more than 3 times higher than they should be. As they turn toward the final approach, they should have been at 2,200 feet. Instead, they're still at a staggering 6,000 feet. The captain recognizes the problem. He lowers the landing gear earlier than normal, not for landing, but to create more drag and increase the descent rate. But it's not enough. They remain dangerously high. Now comes a critical mistake that few viewers would spot, but every pilot would recognize instantly. The aircraft's instruments latch onto what's known as a false glide slope. Imagine aiming for a gentle 3-degree slope down to the runway, but instead catching a dangerous 9-degree slope. It's like the difference between walking down a gentle hill versus sliding down a steep cliff. This false signal tricks the autopilot into thinking they're on the correct path when they're actually plummeting toward the runway at a dangerously steep angle. An alert crew should recognize this immediately, but Captain Glusica, possibly still affected by sleep inertia, fails to identify the error. At 6:03 AM, with the runway in sight, the situation is critical. The aircraft is at 2,800 feet altitude when it should be at 1,200 feet. It's descending at twice the normal rate.
It's too high.
First Officer Ahluwalia warns. The radio altimeter calls out
2,500
as they pass that altitude.
Runway straight down.
The first officer adds.
Oh my god.
The captain responds, finally recognizing the precarious situation. In this moment, every pilot training manual in the world calls for one action: go around, abort the landing, climb away, and try again. But Captain Glusica does the opposite. He disconnects the autopilot and pushes the nose down even further, dramatically increasing their already dangerous descent rate. The aircraft is now plunging toward Earth at nearly 4,000 feet per minute. That's like descending the height of Empire State Building every 20 seconds. The ground proximity warning system activates repeatedly.
Pull up! Pull up! Pull up!
Go around, Captain?
First Officer Ahluwalia suggests, his tone questioning rather than commanding. The captain ignores him, fixated on landing the aircraft. He's fallen prey to what psychologists call plan continuation bias, the tendency to stick with the original plan despite evidence that it's no longer safe or appropriate. When the tower controller asks,
Express India 812, confirm established?
the captain prompts the first officer to respond, affirmative, even though they are far from established on a proper approach path.
Go around, Captain. We don't have runway left.
The first officer calls out more firmly as they near the runway, but it's too late. The aircraft crosses the runway threshold at approximately 200 feet, 4 times higher than the recommended 50 feet, and at 164 knots, well above the target speed of 144 knots. The aircraft is configured with auto brake setting 2, a moderate braking setting, rather than max, which would have been appropriate for the short runway. The Boeing 737-800 floats down the runway, eating up precious landing distance. It finally touches down approximately 5,200 feet from the beginning of runway 24, leaving just 2,800 feet of remaining runway to stop. Captain Glusica deploys thrust reversers and begins braking, but after just 6 seconds, he makes a fatal decision that breaks one of aviation's cardinal rules. He attempts to go around. Boeing's standard operating procedures explicitly prohibit attempting a go around after thrust reversers have been deployed. It's like trying to accelerate and brake simultaneously in your car. Physically impossible to do effectively. Once reverse thrust is engaged, pilots must commit to the landing. The captain stores the thrust reversers and pushes the throttles forward, but the engines need time to spool up. In those critical seconds, the aircraft continues hurtling toward the end of the runway with insufficient speed to take off and insufficient stopping power to halt. The aircraft overshoots the runway and plows through the runway end safety area. The right wing strikes the ILS localizer antenna. The plane crashes through the airport boundary fence and then plunges into the gorge below. Upon impact, the aircraft breaks into 3 sections and bursts into flames. The crash site is chaos. Twisted metals, flames, and smoke fill with the gorge. Local villagers are the first to arrive at the scene, drawn by the sound of the impact and the column of black smoke rising into the morning sky. With no equipment and no training, they became the first responders, pulling survivors from the wreckage before the flames can claim them. 8 passengers manages to escape through openings in the shattered fuselage. But for 158 others, including all 6 crew members, it's already too late. Emergency services arrive minutes later, but the steep terrain and narrow roads make access difficult. What makes the tragedy of Flight 812 particularly heartbreaking is how easily it could have been prevented. A Boeing test pilot testified during the investigation that if the captain had maintained full manual braking and reverse thrust after touchdown, instead of attempting to go around, the aircraft could have stopped within 7,600 feet from the threshold, leaving 438 feet of runway remaining. The conclusion was clear. The direct cause of the accident was the captain's failure to discontinue the unstabilized approach and his persistence in continuing with the landing, despite 3 calls from the first officer to go around, and a number of warnings from ground proximity warning system. The investigation also highlighted organizational issues at Air India Express. The airline operated as a low-cost subsidiary of Air India but lacked its own independent management. Key positions were filled by personnel from Air India who weren't qualified on Boeing 737-800 aircraft. Crew scheduling was done manually, without computerization, leading to last-minute changes and potential fatigue issues. Today, a memorial stands near the crash site, a solemn reminder of the 158 lives lost that May morning in 2010. But can this exact accident happen again tomorrow? The uncomfortable truth is, yes.